So here I'm introducing Dr. Oscar Cabreces, who came in US when he was just 16 years old, and he pursued his undergrad degree from Florida International University in chemistry, and followed by getting a PhD in analytical chemistry from University of South Carolina. And later on, he moved to a whole different field of scientific business management, and he's working at Sciex currently. So these kind of stories are kind of like fuels for international students and help us really keep moving on no matter how hard the situation is. So without talking further, I would ask Oscar to take over and walk us through his amazing journey from holding an I-20 to scientific business management.
Pretty much. Thank you, Shah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad I'm here. I'm gonna give a little PowerPoint. It's just, you know, when I got invited to do this, I was like, wow. First of all, it was an honor because Roshni and I know each other from grad school in South Carolina, #1. And I was like, sure. I'm more than happy to share a brief story of my life here and where I am and where I'm going, and kind of like, you know, give my advice to you, right? I mean, it's different times than the ones I was, 10 years ago. We're not 20 now. So yeah, I just want to give you a quick overview, and hopefully we'll make this a more interactive session after the little PowerPoint that I'm giving, right? So I'm gonna try to fire this up and see if I can project this, share screen. Screen is shared, right? It's all good, right? You can see it. Awesome. All right, so I wanted to start this, like, I actually used a template from a very long time ago presentation that I gave, and I put Doc, right, from Back to the Future, because, you know, of course, where the future's going, we don't need roads. And the thing is, when you're an international student, or when you're in school, in grad school, you don't have a road. Like, you basically are just going on a daily basis, doing what you need to do and figuring out what's going to come next. And I think that was what resonated with me over those years. And you have to navigate, right? There's no real specific road of what to get. You just have to learn how to adjust to that road and create it. So the way I wanted to start this presentation, okay, was to basically show you my road and give you and tell you everything that happened to me and the lessons learned from that. So the way I put it, so like, well, I try to draw a little highway here, and where did I begin? Where I began back in 2000. My parents, I was born in Venezuela. My parents decided to come here to pursue a better life. We sold everything up there. We said, well, we're gonna come here. Actually, we did it in stages. Dad came first, my sisters after, and then I came, and then my mom. And I had graduated high school, although I did a little bit of kind of rework here. And I just said, well, I'm here in the U.S., country that I've always been to. What do I do? Where do I go? And I knew I had a good idea that, you know, sciences, chemistry, business, that was resonating with me, because I did well in chemistry in high school, and it was just something I liked and whatnot. So then we began, and it all began in Rio in 2001, because I was like, well, what do? I applied for a bunch of schools. I did the TOEFL, SATs, and all that stuff, being from abroad. And, you know, fortunately enough, I got admitted at an English program. It was like an English program for internationals at the University of South Carolina. And that's how I started, because I just had to figure out a way how to get into college. And I did that. I did that for a few months, actually won a scholarship. I applied for it. I won a scholarship for about a year. I was in full ride, but, you know, it was a good chunk of cash that helped me out, and enrolled as an undergrad to begin with at Carolina. I actually, you know, life is starting to become, it made a lot of sense, right? And, you know, you're inside, you're mingling with people, going to parties, everything, right? Embracing the American college lifestyle. I even joined the Air Force ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, because in that time it was just like, flexible. And, you know, I actually met some people that say, hey, you know, you could do this. You could probably gain your citizenship quickly. I'm like, wow, you know, perfect. Like it is the way it is. So, you know, football games, everything, it's starting to make sense. Then it didn't start to make sense. Like I said, there was no roads. What happened? 2004 kind of came to my life. I had to drop out of school. And in that time, I didn't have an international student. I was under my parents' visa thing. So it was kind of like sheltered. I had to drop out of school, had to come back here to Florida, help out on the family business, was not doing well. You know, I had to help dad, had to help mom, everybody. Like I said, just left the school, dropped out of the ROTC program. It was very, very difficult. 20 years old, and guess what? When I had citizenship plans, it's no green card yet. Something's going on, right? I was just like, wow, this is going to be a really difficult road. In 2004, 2005 hit, and my family's process was approved. It was great. I say, well, perfect. Well, the moment it got approved, I turned 21 years old. And that to the government here in the US, you're over age. You got to do it on your own. You don't qualify with your family. So I went to zero. I went from having everything to zero. So where do I go, right? So I kind of applied. I went back and, you know, tried to transfer all my transcripts, wrote a letter to the government, say, hey, you know, I'm a student, my family's here, Venezuela's in a crisis, it's just not, we're not going back. They're already residents, they're already on there. I need help. And I was out of status actually for a period of time. I couldn't even go to school. So beg for help, get back to school, kind of took a lot of bureaucracy behind it, and off I got back into FIU. Thankfulness, I got into the program, and I got into the chemistry program too. Transfer all the transcripts after all of that, and kind of was back on track, right? In that time, yeah, I was able to migrate to an international student. Now it was in your feet, what you are today. So it didn't come that way. Boy, okay, so here comes the race, right? You finish undergrad, what do? Again, back into, 7 years ago when I had arrived, I said, well, what do I do now? And I remember a friend of mine came to me and asked me, well, have you ever considered grad school? And I'm like, no. I mean, I'm gotta go get a job, right? I gotta stay here, get the OPT thing and keep going. And I just didn't. And, she was like, no, you should apply. It's actually free. I'm like, you mean grad school's for free? I didn't know that. So I talked to my advisor and whatnot, and I did some undergrad research. I worked with capillary electrophoresis. Actually, that was my first instrument. It was a Beckman instrument. I worked with QTOF also. It was all forensics. It was all my specialty. I did a lot of forensic DNA, forensic drug chemistry, and back at FIU, because I took advantage of that program. And I said, well, this is a bridge for grad school. I need to stay in the country, right? So I got to reinvent myself. I applied. I did the what's it called, the GRE, applied to the schools. Guess where I went back? I actually went back to South Carolina, just because my professor at that time had a friend who ended up being my advisor and my, all my PhD graduate student boss, basically. And off I went back to USC. I knew the state, I knew the college. It was like, perfect. I get to live my dream again up in Carolina. And I did. And what I did, I focused all on, again, forensic chemistry, really focused on analytical chemistry, chromatography, mass spectrometry, very particularly, hence why I am the job I am today. And off I went. So it was awesome, and it was really difficult because you have that pressure. I mean, you got to pass your comprehensive, right? You got to pass your proposal. I failed my comprehensive. I almost failed it. And then I failed it because my mind wasn't there. I was not getting along with other professors and not necessarily the same philosophy. But I said, well, again, what do you depend on? You're an international student on a path to stay here. You got to get through this. So, rebuild myself, really focus on it, and qualify for a PhD, which I did. A lot of work. In 2011, I graduated. And now what? So now it came the decision of I go academics or I go into industry. I've always liked the industry. That's always been my goal. When I started looking at chemistry, I'm like, well, I love the research. I love the fun in the labs. but I love my true passion or my drive is connect that with business, because I think that's what moves the world. That's why we have instruments in the lab. That's why people get grants. That's how we're able to drive innovation into the field. And here I am, right? So I graduated, and fortunately enough, my dissertation project involved a lot of instruments, because that's what I liked. I think getting that exposure as a graduate student of knowing how to use instruments and understanding them back and forth, be sufficient, right, self-sufficient behind that, gives you such a great amount of skills. And I use that. And thankfully, this company, Cursor, which is based out of Maryland, was kind of my savior, basically, because they offered me a job right before I graduated. And I was like, hey, you want to come and work for us when you graduate? Of course, I need to, right? It's like, I can't say no. So I really worked myself into there, and I went straight to work for them. I got an OPT, and then, I asked them, hey, would you do my H-1B, because I need to stay here. At this point, I never considered getting married or getting a green card, just FYI, and I just never did. That was the story. And what happened, I went straight there. I started as an apps chemist. So now I was using my research mentality to put it into industry, and you quickly realize that it is great to have the research mentality, but in 2 weeks, you says, I got to crank out projects, because the company is depending on sales. People, they have to sell to make profit. So switching that academic mentality was very important to consider this. So I became the application scientist that traveled all around the US. Actually, I did Latin America as well, and Europe, because the type of projects that I started working with, and then boom, it just completes you, helps you diversify. You're at the conferences and whatnot. So I did that, and while all of this, it's the H-1B, the green card. And one thing that I kind of learned is, like, if you're in this process, okay, of staying here, you kind of have to go with that mentality of, like, I got to stay with this company. You have to, like, endure the bureaucracies. You have to endure the politics, and you have to, navigate through that, because it's part of it. It's unfortunately the way it is. So we started that green card process. I had to go to Canada to get my visa stamped on my passport. And because, Venezuela was out of it, I haven't been since 2000. So anyhow, we started that. And guess what? That went into crisis too. That's another fire. It completely stalled. Like, the Department of Labor wanted a bunch of paperwork. I had, you as a worker, you don't have much rights because it belongs to the company. Oh, what do you do, right? So you're at a point where you're with the company and you need to figure your life out, but your company, what's more important? Of course, for me, it was personal life. I have nowhere else to go. So I did hire a personal lawyer eventually, right? That was kind of my way out, and kind of sponsor myself. And off we went, and it really went through, right? But the lesson that I learned here was, if you're getting into a company, right, marry that company, right? And you have to go in for the long run. I went for the long run, but I learned, like, there's some things that were not in my control and went up. So I went and said, well, this is more important right now. I got to worry about my family, about myself, and my status here. But also what I had the opportunity on the other side, which was also great, which within the company being there, I went from a NAPS chemist to the commercial team. I took the opportunity of going from supporting customers out there to actually now becoming the face in front of a customer, being the one going to universities, giving talks, being the expert. And that really resonated with me, because that's how you start understanding, at least from the industrial side, how the process is. How is it that a professor will purchase an instrument? Or how is it that a company operates when they bring you in? How do you become that consultant? And that's really gratifying. That's what I love about this, getting in the scientific business, because you use those skills and you learn technically. And you reinvent yourself, and you help people. And that is the most gratifying feeling in the whole world, that you help people obtain where they get to where they are. So after I left and I kind of, figure all this out, I came to Sciex. Back at school at USC, I also had the Sciex instrument, and it was great. And I also had a Gerso instrument. So, and I had this collaboration between both companies for a long time. which took me to where I am today. Great, which I'm grateful. I started here more in a technical marketing position where I was leading globally a global technical team of collaborators and making sure we're getting application notes, publications out. So I was able to write a few publications when I was doing that. So I still had a little bit of that academia role, but inside the company. And then over the last 2 years, I went completely into more managing markets and how do I help the company say, hey, there's an opportunity. For example, I was last year very well involved with the PFAS and the perfluorinated compounds emergence. Okay, and how do I help the company drive their business and make sure that the technology that they're making is suitable for that. But you got to understand the chemistry. So you got to understand how the business dynamics are. So you balance, you bring these two things, and it just takes you where you are. And today, well, you told me you speak Spanish. Well, you should take over Latin America, and that's kind of been the challenge of where I am till today, making sure that I help back where I'm from, helping them adapt mass spectrometry, capillary electrophoresis today, and just technology and using the same knowledge that I've had over the years. It's been technical, but also being that person that really facilitates and just helps others be better. And the goal is 2023. Now it's been 20 years that I've been here. I'm still not a citizen. And that's kind of the lesson I want to say. That's my goal. That's always been my goal. But I've done it through, let's call it brute force work. It is possible. It is just the way our system is built here in the US, which I hope it's going to get reformed and be better. But I'm not the only one, okay? This is why I wanted to just go into the slide. I've actually, Christine Miklayuk, hope I pronounced her last name right. I actually saw her article on Twitter the other day, and I wrote her a message. I'm like, wow, you spent 14 years and you had to leave? I'm like, I've been here for 20. And I'm just struggling to stay. And like, this is not common. Like, it's not uncommon. So we actually chatted, and I told her I was going to give this little presentation for you guys up at Johns Hopkins and refer to her because, like, it's a bunch of us that are around the world kind of scattered with the same principles. And really my take home is, well, which is my conclusion. This is why I wanted to open up. You got to become MacGyver. If you ever watch MacGyver growing up, what did MacGyver do? Just one tool to solve everything, right? You become that person. And I think for anything, whereas if it's technically in the lab solving a separations problem, a technical problem, or scientific problem, whereas if it comes to a life problem, I think that's what a PhD really teaches you, or a grad school in general teaches you. Become independent and solve problems. And for yourself and for whoever else. And I think that makes you very valuable, and it'll take you far. So with that, that's all I had to say in 15 minutes. I hope you can open it up for questions.
Oscar had no idea the story. Absolutely fascinated, inspired, humbled by the story and the hard work that you've put in. I just want to encourage the group here. We're all like a small family today. So feel free to turn your cameras on, your videos on, and ask questions. Yeah, Marta says so inspiring. So feel free, like if you're putting questions in the chat box, feel comfortable to do that. But also, unlike any other presentation, feel free to just turn your cameras on and just ask the questions. And I think Vishal has a question.
Great talk, and very, very inspiring, Oscar. One thing I learned that there are so many things that which happens and we think that, oh, this is probably the end of the world, like failing your qualifiers or like that kind of things, but it is not. And you are a living proof for that. So I will start asking questions about your experience as an international student in the United States.
Yeah.
So you say you came here when you were like 16. That's like really young age, right?
Yeah.
So do you personally think that, like, since you came a lot earlier, in 16, it was easier for you to just got caught up with the cultural difference? And do you think if it is difficult for people who come like late in grad school or postdoc,
Well, I mean, it depends, right? I've been coming to this country since I was a kid, so I kind of knew what I wanted, or sort of like I always wanted to be here, despite living in Venezuela, right? Um, I don't think it's difficult. I think it is also a matter of mentality and where do you want to be, right? Um, I've met people that they love it here, but they just can't be here. They don't like the system, and they just ultimately go back. They go wherever they're from, and that's fine for them. And I'm happy for those people too, because you got to go to whatever you feel right. I think the system is made here for you to absorb it like this. It is the way it is. I think when you come a little bit later stage in your life, well, you come here because there's an opportunity, right? This is the land of opportunities, quote unquote, because you come here, you want a better life than what you had in your own country. The possibilities there it is for that person to embrace it and say, well, do I really want to be here? And that's in everybody's heart. And it's difficult. It's really difficult because there's a lot of things I can tell you. When I personally tell you, when I go to Europe, I have a lot of fun, living the European life, but I wouldn't live that. Same if I go down to Brazil. It's a country I love going to and ultimately love doing business. The people are so happy, but I wouldn't like to live in that chaos. So, there's some things that you kind of, center yourself and decide. So, yeah.
Oscar, I have a question. You'd mentioned during your talk at one point you had to drop out and then go back and help sort of grow the family business. My question at that point was, did you find that helping the family business grow and getting back into that has helped you be sort of a better businessman now? Can you talk a little bit about what kind of
I'm a family person. I mean, this is why I'm back here in Florida now. I live 50 minutes away from my parents. Well, my sisters are kind of spread out, but yeah, it is gratifying. It depends how you feel it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that time made me think a lot, right? Because I was working. I was not going to school. I went actually and I was working at a warehouse, packing up boxes. Again, when you're a chemistry student and you're supposed to be acing PChem and remembering thermodynamic formulas, or you're doing, God, I remember there was that semester where I dropped out. I was in instrumental analysis, and man, I was learning the basics of HPLC, and I was like, I can't go back to HPLC when I'm packing up boxes, go to FedEx, and you got to make sure that the bill of lading is all right. So that type of things just makes you appreciate more your life. At least to me, it did. More what I have today and where I am. And it makes you, and I think also the diversification of knowledge is super important. When would you expect to go and drive a forklift and you're like, oh, you're a scientist, you're supposed to be mixing with pipettes? I'm like, no, I'm not afraid of picking up a forklift and putting a pallet, 2-ton pallet inside of a truck. I mean, that type of stuff.
Nice. So what was the biggest challenge for you when you started your grad school in a different country to get used to it after living in Venezuela for?
Wow. Well, I think the difficulty, I mean, at USC, everything was nice because, I met so many good people, but I guess it depends on finding your integration, I think, was like, because the classes are easy, professors were very helpful. I remember my classes were great. I mean, I had fun, except the physics professor would throw a formula on the board and you have to figure it out. I mean, but in terms of I think finding your integration with the right group of people that you want to be, I think that's what took time. Me personally, I for some reason, I gravitated always to hang out with business students, but I was the chemistry student. I mean, I would hang out with the chemistry portion but everybody was so centered in the lab and the research. And I was like, these other guys are like partying and they're still acing. I'm like, so I had to find a balance, right? So I don't know, I'm just like that. So
another thing that I sort of took away from your story was the twists and turns, and you had a twisty road and you had like a little arrow pointing. Along those twists and turns, and I mentioned this in the chat box, was there were a bunch of failures. I mean, that's what we talked about. We don't usually talk about our failure stories, but you did, and I'm grateful that you did. During the course of failure, one builds, as an international student or otherwise, resilience. What are some of the tips that you have for advising students to build up that sense of resilience as they go through the graduate or postdoc careers?
Wow, that's a great question. Listen, I think keep focus on your goals. I think that's the number one. Why are you here to begin with? Why did you come here? And always think about it. And am I here to get an education and go back to my country or go to another country afterwards? Am I here because I want to stay in this country? I think that is primordial. And I think that's what builds your resilience, because like I said, I remember 2008, man, I was so frustrated, sad that I just didn't pass my comprehensives. I mean, my professors, my board, the advising board told me, we're going to give you one more chance, but if not, you're going to have to leave with a master's and go somewhere else. And say, okay, well, you know, I have to get my act, right? And why am I here? And it was a failure because, first of all, I was nervous. I didn't know what I was talking about. You know, you get hung in the details of the program, and all of a sudden you just lose that of yourself, right? So I think you hit that wall many times. You get down and you look at yourself and like, okay, it's not magic. It just doesn't happen from one day to the other. It just takes time. But building confidence and making sure, hey, I'm here for this reason. And you gotta go and, you know, look at the pros and cons and accept the realities that they will come to your way and work with them. Just work.
Right. So you're saying a lot of what you're suggesting is that if you have a problem, reframe how the problem looks and sort of approach it from a reframe sort of point of view.
Right.
And I think that's what, I think that's a great way to build resilience. I think, Dora, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think that's just the way I work. At least me. I mean, I hit I'm not perfect. I make so many mistakes all the time, but hey, I learned from that, you know, and that's what I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's very inspiring. And since I'm a customer of Sciex, so I'm actually very interested in your current job and want to know if there is opportunity for newly graduate student at Sciex.
Yeah, actually, yes, there is. I mean, Sciex belongs to a bigger company called Danaher. Okay, they, you know, we're company sisters with Phenomenex as well. They make columns and consumables and labware, and then there's also partners with PAL, Biosciences, Beckman Coulter, whatnot. So opportunities at Sciex, yes. I mean, there are from the R&D perspective. So there's an R&D facility in Canada. There are application scientist positions within the US as well. They're always looking to hire. So the best thing is keep in touch with us, you know, and, you know, introduce you to the right people. I think here's another asset for anybody. You see the sales guys that walk in your labs, they're trying to sell you. No, those guys are your into these companies, not necessarily because they're going to hook you up with a job or anything, but those relationships that you create with them, they're going to go long ways. What's happened, for example, the sales rep back in my in grad school, I also had a Waters HPLC. That sales rep was my coworker last year in the same team. And it was just like, hey, you know, we're together now. And it just goes long ways. So anybody, you know, if you want to get into the industry, industrial side of things, keep those connections alive, because they take you places. There's always a lab looking for somebody, or we're looking for an engineer somewhere, and all of a sudden you just create a network.
Thanks. Well, we actually have our Waters HPLC in our lab. It lasts for so long.
Yeah, like I said, you become friends with all your vendors. I think that is critical. I have a lot of friendships with my what call competitors today. But why? Because we work together. We're in the same business, and despite we compete because of Brandon, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I help him out. We help each other out. It's just, you never know where you're going to end.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Oscar, I have a question from one of the students. Marta says, can you please elaborate on switching from academic mentality, what you mentioned during your talk? what was the biggest or most pronounced change that you had to make?
Wow, well, time. When we're working on projects in academia, we do have pressures. I mean, we have timelines of, hey, we need to get this paper out, or we need to send the NIH a report back on the grant so the grant is renewed. That's a different type of pressure when, hey, we have an instrument that we're gonna sell next week. We need to make sure we get all the documentation and the data. Doesn't mean that you're gonna be there overnight working hours and hours. You just wanna make sure you provide a customer with the data and the necessities that the customer promptly, and you do him what he needs, not an excessively over. For example, I'll tell you, I was doing a work on urine. It was drugs of abuse in urine, and I remember doing this study on matrix effects and everything. It really revealed me a lot of research data, and the customer told me, this is great, but I don't care about it. Blunt. I was like, oh, I just spent a whole 3 days working and crunching this. Immediately, you know that you have to just be a good listener and really use those skills. I'm like, well, I can do that experiment in 24 hours. I should be able to get you the really good quality results. Why? Because you're using that technical ability to do so. So that's kind of like the shift. Really, we don't, at least in this environment, we take our time, but we don't really have too much time. So,
yeah. Another academic related question is, can you take us back to that moment when you were trying to decide what path to take right after a PhD or graduation?
yeah.
In that moment, how did you decide, okay, academia wasn't for me and I want to go into sort of a different sort of field?
Well, it was a good moment, right? Because what really turned me off was the fact that, well, I got to go get a postdoc so I can become a professor. And a postdoc is like, how long is this postdoc going to get? And what am I going to do as a postdoc? And the stories that, I mean, at least it was kind of the impression that I got. It looked like a much more of a road. And also, like I said, I didn't like, I love to teach. I love, going and teaching things that are actually practical, but it wasn't my wow, my dream is to become a PI and do this massive research. At least it wasn't. But what I had in my other aspect was like, well, how can I go and help PIs or help anybody else through innovation where new things are always created? That's really what's my drive. Connecting the business side, like this instrument fits this budget and there's a reason why, or this instrument fits this application, this sensitivity levels, blah, blah, blah. But I use my technical knowledge to really help drive and say, hey, let's just work together. And hence where I am. So.
And let me ask one more question to lead into that, Vishal. Is when you did decide, okay, this wasn't for me, what were the skills that you had already that you employed in order to make the transition? Or what skills did you have to build afterwards when you transitioned into your new role?
Well, I had a lot of technical skill. I mean, I repaired instruments left and right in the lab. Like all of our instruments were broken. We didn't have service. So the first thing I did was learning how to take instruments in and out. And this was actually back in undergrad. I mean, the old capillary electrophoresis instrument I had was broken all the time, was leaking coolant left and right. And I learned how to seal it. I repaired it. I read the manual. I kind of used, engineering logic or whatnot. And okay, here it is. So I think when you go into an industry job, you go with a lot of technical skill. But one thing that our system lacks is teaching us one-on-one. I don't want to say in business skills, but they're almost like people one-on-one skills in terms of like, how do you deal with a customer? How do you open up a conversation, like sales training or business training of some sort, right? That lacks because I think the system is not created, of course. It's created for you to become an independent researcher and an independent mind, but it doesn't give you that other side unless you go and really, take a class behind it and whatnot. Yeah, that's about it. I think I hope that answers the question. But yeah, you kind of come into that mentality. Now, the cool thing is you can, what I've seen students or people go is they become service engineers, for example. They go install things, which is when you're super technical, but they'll get you into a super technical job, but they start developing more of that relationship skill. Not that people don't have it, it's just there's a commercial way to do these things. And so the service engineer portion, I think I sometimes think about it, I'm like, man, I should have done that if I had the chance. I went straight to the scientist position. That's also cool because you help so many people and people are like, look at you like hero. Oh my God, you got my instrument up and running again. It's just super gratifying, pretty nice experience.
All right, Oscar. So since your transition was from like kind of benchtop chemistry to the whole business field, and as we all know, there are like enormous number of applicants for one particular job, right? So what was your strategy to stand out amongst them?
Wow. Well, number one, have like the more experience you have technically on an instrument or any type of technology is, I think, is an asset. That's missing in the industry. But just being yourself, ask for a job. Like, hey, I want to work here. Like, I think that's your genuinity and your energy towards something. Because typically, when you're coming out of grad school, you're gonna apply to 4 or 5 different jobs, sometimes even more. Why? Because you just want to secure something. The idea is to pick the 4 that you really, really want and really drive those conversations to the ones that are you really care. And say, man, I really want to do this, but put your effort into it, like, hey, I want to do this, and make sure you're vocal about it, because I think any hiring manager is appreciative of that. Anybody, you want to have people working with you that want to grow, that want to do something, you want to continuously improve themselves and help others. And I think that's more meritory than having the perfect resume. That's just, to me, what does it, right? Like, I look at people like, hey, I really want to do it. I just want to work and do it. Yeah.
So you have a common theme emerging from your advice, and that theme is talk to people, get curious, drive those conversations, and people are the focus when you're looking for jobs.
Be focused. I think keeping focus on the jobs that you really feel. I've seen, I don't want to say it's a mistake, or I understand the feeling behind it, but when you apply to 20 different other positions, you lose track. You completely, you're not personal. You're just one more person trying to get a job, and probably somebody will need that job more than you, right? So, if the effort is not there,
find a job that's a good fit, and then really put in the effort.
Really drive it. Mm-hmm.
Right. So part of this job searching, we always advise, and other people give us advice too, that it's a lot of networking and people building skills. But there are those that feel that networking is for extroverts. What advice would you give to those who are more reserved when it comes to networking?
Poster presentations. I think that's like the best way how to come out of a show. I think in a poster, you convey, hey, I did this research. I did this, I did. And this goes, if whether a person goes to academia or not, it doesn't matter, whatever, because anyhow, after a student, you're going to move over somewhere, regardless where it is. You're still going to have to interview for a job. And I think your poster, the bridge to do that is your poster presentation. Every time you stand in front of a poster, you're proud to show the work that you're doing, the results. I'm a fan of going around PitCons and ASMSs all around, when I go to the conferences and I chat, they set up posters that I really drive, because people want to talk about their research, and to me, of course, I want to learn more. But that's the essence. I think your poster should be the presentation of yourself. Your work will speak for itself. The results will speak, but how you present them and how you really, hey, this is so cool. I'm doing this. Wow, you're great. And that's for an introverted or an extroverted person. Doesn't matter. It's your work.
Yeah, and given most people nowadays are asking the question, given the pandemic and that we're not having an in-person sort of conference, do you have sort of suggestions for virtually networking and driving those conversations?
Well, LinkedIn is a great platform. I think it's helped out. In fact, if I want this, I mean, I'm speaking from the industry. I would love to see more research put out there than the industrial people trying to sell you instruments or trying to sell you stuff. At least that's kind of like an angle that I'm trying to do to be more influential. I think that's a good avenue to do it. I know the communities in Twitter, for example, are also getting, the scientific community in Twitter is actually picking up a lot of steam. A lot of conversations, just people dropping a figure here and there. Hey, you know, got this result, or hey, we're happy to share. We just published this paper, and I think it's a good way to network. And all of a sudden, you'll be connected to whoever community that is doing whatever, and that's how you start mingling kind of around, and you just, you know, on it goes. So I've seen that, especially not being able to go to conferences, and yeah, and like connect with the industry people, because they're always organizing these meet the experts webinars, and that's a good place where you can interact with others.
So my question, following Roshni's questions, so networking is important. At the same time, I have heard that before from different recruiters and people, that they also value having some soft skill, because everybody has paper and everybody is chemist. So how much do you value soft skills? And the following question is, like, most of the time we are surrounded by very academic people, and it's very hard to think about coming out of the box and doing leadership stuff and brushing up your soft skills. So how do you really balance that when you have like a really hectic lab schedule and PhD life?
Wow. Listen, I think that comes out with two things. Like you say, how much I value. I think I value a person. I value somebody who wants to work, or whenever, regardless if, you know, let's say you don't have those skills like properly or whatnot, still valuable. Okay, that's number one. I think as a student or as a postdoc, you're looking at, is finding that balance when you're already what you're doing on a work life, because I think that starts developing you more in the person. The lab is fun. You get results, you get stuck, you pipette samples, you put them in the PCR instrument, you put it on whatever it is that you're doing, biochemistry, chemistry, it doesn't matter. And you spend countless hours. And I think those countless hours are wasted hours sometimes, because why, you know, you gotta take a step back. I'm like, why am I investing so much time here and just worry about these peaks and whatnot, when you have a personal life and other people to connect with, right? I think that's one of the things. Maybe call me a lazy chemist, but I like to automate things. You know, hey, the less that I have more interaction is, the more time I have time to interpret the results and have conversations with other people, that maybe a chemistry or scientific conversation that will lead into something else. And all of a sudden you just start developing that way. I think kind of not ducking the head, being in the lab so much and doing something else, I think is something necessary. And I know we've been, I mean, all of us have been there. I work here, I don't work 9 to 5. I work hours, and it's normal. But you need to find that balance. And that's what's going to get you out, I think.
Speaking of balance, what do you do in your spare time? I know you create a bunch of content on LinkedIn, and recently you're creating a little bit of content on Instagram and things like that.
Yeah.
So what do you do in your spare time, and what is your advice to maintain sort of the work-life integration? I can't say balance, because right now it's all mushed together. So as a person who's so busy, traveling a lot, what are your recommendations to ensure work-life?
Well, I mean, at least in my life, I live in Florida, so I take the advantage of going to the beach as much as I can. But remember when I was living in Maryland, Annapolis was a great time. It was a great time to go and spend, but I don't know, with all the quarantines and all that stuff right now, it's difficult. Definitely find time for yourself and do something else. There's a good climbing gym. I remember in Columbia, Maryland, I was a member of. You just gotta step up. And that's where there's limits and set boundaries. You have to learn how to set boundaries with your own research and with your own work. Even if you're your own PI, your own boss, whatever you're doing, you have to set boundaries, because that's the secret. That's the only thing And trust me, yourself is inside yourself is gonna be gratifying.
That's what I actually needed to hear. This is why we show up, because we show up to these kind of events because we never know what we're going to leave with, what pearls of wisdom, what story someone's going to say that resonates with us. And this is what I needed to hear today. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You have to have boundaries. Like,
Yeah.
especially right now, like I said, I'm managing a business and have meetings later in the afternoon and all this stuff. But I set this time because I wanted to speak with you. To me, this is very important. Now that work isn't, but this is, take a time and be yourself and chat with our scientists. You gotta do it. I think it's pretty good.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Oscars, you have made an amazing journey from PhD to Sciex. So if I ask you, how does your career look like? What's next?
Boy, I mean, if I tell you, and it's gonna be crazy. No, I'm just joking. Ideally, at some point, I'm gonna be doing my own thing. I don't know if it's gonna be a lab or store. I don't know, but I do believe I'm more entrepreneurial like that. I think here I got a great potential here at Sciex to grow, and I'm going to continue pursuing that. And at the same time, I'm looking at myself, and I have, like I said, I have a family business that probably at some point is going to land in my hands, right? So I'm going to be able to drive that. So they do furniture, nothing related to science, but yeah, that's always been my goal, like myself. So
we want to go back, and in the last sort of 10 or so minutes, we want to touch back with you about your international experience, because that's something that you presented very powerfully in the beginning. Lately, there have been a lot of conversations about international students talking about accents and how our accents, right? And how we can either leverage, or accents sometimes become a hindrance to our career progress. And I had written a post about it based on some student, and it went semi-viral and things like that. How do you advise someone who's worried about their accent getting in the way of their career?
Nothing. That should be none of your worries. Zero. What your worry should be is making sure that you are authentic and that you're yourself. I think that is what you should always be, and not even worried. It's just make sure that that's what it gets highlighted. In terms of getting a job or going anywhere, I mean, heck, I've been here forever and I still have some sort of accent. So it will never go away, and I don't care. I don't care, honestly. It's just like the way it is. So
yeah. So many people had said, they feared that people hired them less so amongst different candidates based on the country that they're from and the accent that they're from. And you're obviously living proof that you just worked hard and sold your skill sets and sold your personality and sort of been authentic in the whole process to get where you're at.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something I wouldn't worry. One thing I want to make almost like a final point. I know we're running out of minutes here. Make sure you're here already, right? And all these things that are happening in the government, and proposing changes. And I remember just recently they wanted to ban the international students, which I found completely dumb. But okay, that's a separate conversation. You gotta stay to yourself. What do you want to do with your career, and where do you want to be? Do you want to be here, or do you want to be here somewhere else? Are you open to be somewhere else in case you're not here? You have to have that mentality already, not because things are getting worse. I don't foresee it getting worse, but there's a lot of changes, and with changes comes uncertainty. And uncertainty brings a lot of nerves and a lot of nights without sleeping, because I went through that. Okay. Yeah. So I think this is a time to put things into perspective. Do I want to stay here and suck it up, and I want to have a life here? And then, okay, and if that is so, then craft a plan around that. Or plan B, hey, I don't mind going to Germany, or just to say something, or the UK, and maybe relocate there and start a life, and maybe have an opportunity to come back here in the future. but you know, you need to have that very, very well set. I think that is fair for anybody at this point, because just with the amount of uncertainty, it's difficult to if you don't keep focus.
Yeah. Okay.
So Oscar, we are definitely we're running out of minutes and few minutes left. So if I ask you as one of the last questions, probably the last question, what would be the one piece of advice you want to give as a message to grad students and postdocs who are especially planning to enter into business world? What are the strategic steps they should make and when they should start thinking about it?
Well, like I said, what we said before, creating your relationships, number one, I think with your vendors, even if it's just the vial vendor, doesn't matter, create those relationships. That's number one. Number two, investigate on the companies, even if it's for example, CRO lab, or if it's a vendor of a certain technology provider. Investigate it, read about that, educate yourself, and become acquainted with what they do. I think, and reach out, network with these people online. I'm telling you, the commercial teams in sciences are always looking to connect with others, despite what it is. It is always why, because that's kind of like a philosophy that is embedded within the community in general. So connect with those other people, regardless where you think, and have conversations. Be candid. No, nothing else than that. And now if you start seeing and you start studying how the industry is moving, and there's a new trend for testing nitrosamines in the pharma world, and obviously everybody's talking about it, and like you become part of that, and you bring whatever value. Again, he's bringing your value as a scientist, as a researcher, and somebody who's going to graduate. You still bring value to the party. Well, you do.
You know, Oscar, speaking of value, that's exactly what you've provided to this conversation today. I took a lot of nuggets that I'll be incorporating in my own life, and I'm sure the audience here too. Thank you for showing up, you guys, and listening to Oscar's story. We will put this video up on YouTube. So if you want to share with your friends to inspire them, definitely do that as well. Vishal?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, same. Thank you everyone to show up. And thank you so much, Oscar. I have learned a lot.